Great. So I think with that, we should, just jump into the core content for today, which is legal aspects that every entrepreneur should know. And, I really see legal aspects in three buckets. One is, business as usual. We are happy. We are focusing on our startups. Legal issues are not even crossing our mind, right? We have not even thought about it other than to say, okay, I need to incorporate my company. Other than that, I think, it's not top of mind for an entrepreneur. It becomes top of mind when you are going through a planned kind of stage, right? You're signing a contract, or you're going in for a fundraise, or you're, talking to a potential buyer. At that time, it just becomes top of mind, right? All of those terms like term sheet and call and put and all of those options you start to go and Google and try to figure it out. And then in my mind, there's a third bucket, which is kind of unexpected, unforeseen issues. So, for example, COVID happened, right? And, suddenly the clause that you don't even read in contracts, right? The force majeure clause. Suddenly, everyone is now aware about it. So, there are these three buckets of legal issues. And I think as entrepreneurs, the awareness of what you're dealing with, how you need to plan ahead and make sure that you're covered is absolutely such a critical thing to have. So thank you so much, Maitri, for joining us. Maitri has a lot of experience in advising startups on structuring, on going through planned and unplanned situations nationally and internationally. She's worked with Amarchand Mangaldas, which is one of the leading firms in this space, and now she's a founding partner at Varuna Law. So over to you, Maitri, and really looking forward to this session.
Thanks a ton, Shivani, and I'm very excited to be here. It's I love working with startups, and the reason is that I meet people who are very, very passionate about what they're doing. It shows in the work that they do, and it's so exciting working with people like this. It's we don't, when you meet people in the corporate side, there are people who are passionate. There are people who are very dedicated to their work, but I think startups is a completely different ball game. Like it's almost becomes part of their system. So I do I enjoy working with startups, which is why I initially, when I started Varuna Law, we started mentoring a bunch of startups actively, and I continue to do so. And that's one reason. And the second thing is I went through this whole journey myself as a startup owner. I before between Amarchand Mangaldas and Varuna Law, there was a very significant 6 years, which is Planet Wildlife, which was a company that I started up. It was into green travel, eco-friendly travel space, sustainable travel space. So that journey took me different places, and it taught me so much. And I'm sure every startup owner goes through the same ups and downs. So I think I understand the whole the ups and downs that a startup founder goes through very personally, from a personal level, which is why I think when I started Varuna, it was with a different sort of a setup, mindset. And between these two ventures, I think startups have a very close place in my heart. So I'm very happy to be here. So I think I can start out with the presentation if you would like, or if you would like to give, I would prefer to give a sort of a background of where my journey is before I set out the presentation, if that's okay with you.
That sounds wonderful, Maitri.
Great. So, in the year 2009 is when I started Planet Wildlife, and it was something that I was very passionate about, making sure that the carbon footprint of travel was low, and all of this. So when I started the company, I think it was just pure passion, like how it is for most startup owners. And the company did very well in a very short period of time. It had 3 offices in 3 different countries. It became about, its top line became 8 million. It did very, very well. Then, but through this journey of 5-6 years, what I realized is my true calling. Like through the entire 6 years, I continued being a lawyer, of course. I used to work actively with a lot of non-profits, giving pro bono work and services to people, especially social development sector. And also for Planet Wildlife itself, there was a lot of legal work that was happening, because it was a sector that needed a bit of we needed to ensure that our liabilities were controlled and all of that. So through the journey of 6 years, I realized my true calling was being a lawyer. Though I came from Amarchand Mangaldas, 6 years, 7 years in Amarchand Mangaldas, I had a great training. It was my first job, and the training was wonderful. So then that is the reason why I moved out to and started Varuna Law, which is a legal consultancy. So in terms of journey, what I'd like to point out to all the people here on this forum today is that my mindset made a lot of difference. When I was in Planet Wildlife, the whole mindset was, do I jump on the bandwagon of getting funded? No, I was having a lot of FOMO issues as to whether I'm the only one who's not getting funded in the travel space. Do I do a strategic sort of a strategic merger? There were so many of these things functioning at the back of my mind. But whereas when I moved into Varuna Law, it was my mindset had changed. I don't know if it was a function of time. I had become more mature, or it was just a different field, or my whole focus and passion was different. Whatever it was, the mindset was different. At this point, when I started Varuna Law in 2015, the whole focus was, how do I build value? Okay. So when that happened, there was a big difference in the way I looked at work, in the way I conducted myself as the founder of Varuna Law. As a leader, I became when I started offering services. So all of these things changed. So I was no longer looking for funding as such. Though in the last 6 years we had some opportunities where a larger firm, one of the bigger firms in India, wanted to acquire us. We had to look back, sit down, analyze, and say, okay, does it make sense given the type of work we want to do, the value we want to build, and what is the mix of work we do? So we do a lot of pro bono work. We try to do at least 20% of our billable hours in a year annually to be pro bono. Can we sustain that? What is our philosophy? So this entire thing, I think, was a journey for me, right from Planet Wildlife to Varuna. I think the journey itself changed me as a person, and I'm sure each entrepreneur also faces these issues as each time their startup goes through an up or down, or things like COVID happens. There are a lot of things that fundamentally, as focus, they change. But one thing that we must note is things like legal issues are so rigid. They just are there lying down somewhere. So it makes a lot of sense to check all the boxes. I don't suggest any startup founder to that they spend too much time on legal, too much time or money. But I think it is important that you check a few boxes before, because through all these ups and downs, this is like a foundation. So it sort of helps you stay there strong, rooted, if you have all of these correct. So with that, let me start with my presentation. Um, can you see what my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, oh, sorry. Just give me a second. So, what I'd like to take you through is basically the journey that every startup takes. And a lot of times, like Shivani said right in the beginning of the talk, and that's often mm, a discussion I have with a lot of startups. And especially since we mentor many of these startups, it's a discussion that I pretty much have with every startup that we mentor. So, when do you need a lawyer? That is something that a lot of startups struggle with. They're so caught up with the work that they do, and and the idea itself, the company, the business, that a lot of times things like compliance and legal issues take a backseat. So, just to set out, I think this is generally the growth cycle of any startup. So it starts with the idea stage, then you do a seed, you set it
Just
up.
sorry, Maitri. Actually, we are seeing it a little small. If you could just put it in presentation mode, I think it's not.
Oh, all right. Um, Sorry, I'm not comfortable with the
I
flip.
think the small thing on the bottom right might do it. Um,
Yes,
This.
yes, on the bottom right, very close to the slide. If you can see that sliding rule, no, on the left hand side, the first thing on the left hand side, if you click on that, will take you present. Yeah.
oh,
Is this
perfect,
better?
perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, I use Keynote, so I'm terrible with Microsoft PowerPoint. I'm so sorry for that, but I hope you are able to see it now.
It's
Um,
perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for pointing it out. What I was going back to what I was saying, that each startup goes through these several rounds, and a lot of times we tend to see. We tend to try and decide when we should start engaging with lawyers. My suggestion is always start with engaging with lawyers before you set up your company, so that you have a basic idea as to what needs to be done. I think there was a question on this as well. But when do you start thinking about legal issues? Ideally, you should start thinking about your legal issues once you have your idea and your business model in place, and you know what you're doing. You need to validate your business model. One of the ways to validate your business model, of course, you validate go to market, you do all of that, but I think it's also important that you just check whether this is legally and tax efficient, whether it works for you legally, and if it works for you legally, what are the high level items that you need to keep in mind. So it's a quick consult with a lawyer in each of the places that I know you there are people from all over the country on this forum, but pretty much every big city like Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, definitely. N- Now, I think geography is not really an issue, but even then, each of these cities have fairly good startup mentoring networks. There are people who mentor startups, so it is a question of having a quick consultation. So one of the things that is important for a lot of times we get the question as to what is the um, at the incorporation stage itself, if you should have thought about what is the model you're looking at, and what is the type of a type of entity you're looking at as a startup. Like for example, there were there are companies that start out at LLPs because a lot of times they believe that LLPs have lower compliance requirement, but while giving the comfort of having a limited liability, so to say. And they set up their companies as LLPs, and then at some point they figure out that funding is a big challenge for LLPs. Similarly, when you set up a company like a partnership or a sole proprietorships, what are the pros and cons? What business are you into? So none of these structures are good or bad, if you ask me, but I think it is important for you to understand what each of these entities do for you, and do they fit your business model. So this discussion, for you to have this discussion, you need to sit down with a lawyer or a company secretary, and it is a detailed discussion. So that is one. The next aspect of it is some of these issues, like the fundamental terms. I won't get into specifics, but the fundamental um, aspects of an incorporation of a company, if they go wrong, in the sense that you do some of the initial filings wrong, or if you do not do a compliance, like for example, let's say you're setting up a company in America, it's a wholly owned subsidiary of your Indian company, and you do not do some compliance requirements with RBI correct, what happens is it'll come back many years later, that and there is no real way of solving the issue. Okay, in the sense that as you know, if you go and go to RBI and seek a correction, which is something your investors or whoever is looking into your business at whatever point of time, and you realize that this mistake has happened and you want to correct it, at that point what happens is you might not find a very efficient way of correcting it. RBI will ask you 1,000 questions. They'll ask you to go back and do something which might not be okay with the US law. So all of these issues really tend to become very, very complicated, and they tend to become, thorns in our side. So one of the things that you must do right at the incorporation stage is consciously make a decision as to what type of entity you want to go, why you're choosing that type of entity, and get the entire compliance aspect of it right. That is so at the incorporation stage. At an early stage, once you set it up, the legal compliances that compliance wise, they might not be, they're very annual in nature. You just end up doing the same set of like board resolutions and annual filings. These are all annual, they happen automatically. Most of your company secretaries are really good at doing it, so there is no problem. But at an early stage, when you set out, these are some of the things that you have to start thinking of. So, what are these things? Like co-founder agreements? You need to start out thinking about, especially if you have set up a company and you're bringing in new shareholders, how the division of rights happens. You start thinking of your key employees. How do you want to, what kind of work do you want to ask them to do? What kind of rights do you want to give them? Some of the most successful startups are the ones that treat their employees, their key employees, very, very well. Case in point being, like for example, Zomato, I think has a good amount of ESOP structures, what I've heard, and a lot of their, top level people have stuck around. Um, Similarly, things like tax compliances, a lot of these issues are things that you should, they're very, very easy fixes. They're not really something that you need a very high level lawyer or somebody who is going to bill you by the hour and charge you a ton. It's not, you don't need those people. You need a reasonably good lawyer who has a good understanding of corporate law, and they giving you some idea as to how to go about each of these things. Why are these important? They're important because they set your foundation. So once you have all of these things set out correctly, you will not be, you don't need to relook at a lot of these at all. For example, things like your contractual arrangements, your vendor contracts. Once you set it out correctly and you set up everything in a vendor contract correctly, moving forward, it's just a negotiation on price, or maybe a few times you're negotiating some terms, but mostly you've gotten it right. So this is a one-time exercise, and I think it's important that most, especially since startups are investing so much time and effort into their businesses, and they're pretty much running the show themselves with a small team. It is necessary that you get all of these things right once, so that you can move forward and do whatever else is required from the business standpoint. Then at a later stage, yes, of course, once you start looking at investments and valuations and all of these things, you will need more expert guidance in terms of, again, you will need a corporate lawyer who will give you advice as to what is the correct way of doing it, because a lot of times compliances in our country are the best way to do it. Okay, let me put it this way: the best way to do it is getting it correct the right time. Rectification of a lot of wrongs is a very complicated affair. So it is better to get advice before and get it right. Work with company secretaries and lawyers who have done this work before, so that they can tell you exactly what is required. Then ongoing things, like in the future stage, once you're set out, the investments are done, you have like Shivani was saying earlier in this earlier today, she was talking about put options and call options. It is always better to, of course, I think you will get a good working knowledge of what it is from the internet, but it is very important to understand structures, to understand consequences of each of these, because legal jargons and 50 100 pages documents are difficult for most non-lawyers to go through and understand the full 360-degree implication of it. So it is better to have a quick round of discussion and understand how to go about these things. Then ongoing things, once you're at a certain stage, the company is at a certain stage, yes, you will require litigation support and general legal support, and all of those at that point of time will not be so daunting for startups, because they are no longer startups. They've become big enough for them to do all of these, their departments to handle it. They're all so these almost sort of become part of the system, so you're fine that way. So I've just set out a couple of things that I get asked a lot of times when I do this presentation about legal compliances for startups. So some of the things that we get asked about often are about founders agreement. I'll quickly run through this. If there are any specific questions, I'm happy to take it. But I'll just quickly run through this. So founders agreements are very, very important for the simple reason that they pretty much show how you are aligned with each other on the startup front. On the business front, are you looking at your visions for growth, your visions for roles and responsibilities, your visions for decision making, operational responsibilities? All of those are actually put together in a founders agreement. A founders agreement also sort of protects whoever is part of that agreement, both the founders or multiple founders, where they basically say that if anyone wants to exit, so it is good for the people exiting as well as the persons remaining, because there's a whole there will be protections for both. So these are aspects, and succession of a startup is something that a lot of people do not plan when they set out doing setting up a startup. They always assume that everything is going to be fine. No, in a lot of times it is, but founders agreement are not really it is not just when there's a dispute, it is also for the day-to-day functioning. To for avoidance of disputes also, founders agreements are very important. So it is something to think about. Unless you feel that both of you are peas in a pod and you're always going to get are always going to get along together, and you're going to think exactly the same way about everything, I think founders agreement are important. So even for Varuna Law, for instance, it's my I'm the co-founder, and the founder of the organization is Narendra. He's my husband and also a lawyer. We still have a founders agreement. So it is just a question of setting things out, saying that this is in black and white. So these are things that are important. All the things that you see here, the ROFO, ROFR, tag, drag, all of these are legal structures. Basically, how do transfers of shares happen when someone wants to leave? So each of these are rights that shareholders or founders have vis-a-vis each other. And the important part about a lot of startups I know set up this 50-50% structure in shareholding, and things like I mean, it's all good, but the concept of how to treat a deadlock, which is basically when both of you are disagreeing and things are, there's a stalemate and nothing is moving forward, how do you treat it, is something that is very, very important, and you need to cover it, especially if your startup has a shareholding structure that is equally split, or it is split into 25% each for four shareholders. So all of these are, I again, I'm not going to get into specific structures. These are more there's Russian roulette, Texas shootout. All of these are options that are built in. So we lawyers use these. We name all of these options so that we can remember them easily. But these are all structures that are built into your founders agreement or shareholders agreement. So that's important for you to think about and have. So if there are any specific questions about any of these, I'm happy to answer. But that's from the side of the presentation itself. Yeah.
So I just have a quick comment actually, and then we'll open it up to questions. Pooja and I did a startup together for 10 years, and we actually did not have a shareholding agreement, founders agreement. And, the fact is that I wish, and we got into these situations, right? I mean, not everybody thinks about everything in the same way. Thankfully, we are good friends and we worked it out on an emotional level and talked it out and got through all of those situations. But as a new founder, you don't think about these things. So, I think just having the awareness that there are structures like this to help you is important to have. And to right from the beginning kind of have that understanding that this is how we would resolve things in certain situations. So that was just my comment on saying that to the people who are starting out, this is such valuable information that you are getting at this stage, which we learned over 20 years of experience. So sure, so we can open it up to questions.
Yeah,
and then we have a few people who have sent in questions before
Yes.
as well. So, then we'll get to those. But let's just open it up to the people who are here right now.
So I had a
Yeah.
question. Thank you, Maitri, for that wonderful presentation, and thanks, Shivani, for hosting us today. Maitri, I'm the founder of Loan Genie, which is a lending fintech into giving small personal unsecured loans to folks in Bangalore. And so, in the course of giving these loans, we come across signing of contract documents. And given that it is COVID situation, I'm trying to see how I can get the whole contract signing online. So was wondering if you have one is you do get stamping paper these days issued online for quite some time. I think some of the states are offering that. So
Correct.
yeah, so I was just wondering, what's the easiest way to get a basically a contract document signed, stamped, and signed online, which is valid later on, so that in case you need to pursue it in a legal manner, then it stays valid in the court of law.
Right. So that's great. Since you're based in Bangalore, I think the stamp, there is the concept of e-stamp paper, etc. But it is not there across the country. In many other states in the country, including in Telangana, Hyderabad, we do not have e-stamp paper. However, the best, to just answer your question, the legally soundproof way of doing it would be to ensure that somebody fixes their digital signature certificate,
Mhm.
the DSC, to the document. But I'm not sure who your clientele is and whether they will have DSEs. If they're not going to be able to do that, I think making it very clear that this is a contract and this is a legally enforceable contract, and they're agreeing to the terms after understanding it is
Right.
something that you can do. And they sign and they send you a copy of the document, since you're anyway paying the stamp duty. I think if you can get them to sign the document and scan it back to you, that should be sufficient evidence of a valid contract.
Yeah, so there's no online kind of signature that they can do, which is valid in the court of law, you're saying?
So I know a lot of sites like DocuSign, etc., give you that option of actually, doing your signature online.
Right.
It is see, the whole concept of e-contract, electronic contracts in India is very nascent. So how do you affix a valid contract? I think the best way to avoid this whole concept of, whether I actually signed it, whether it was me, it was my signature, is DSE. But if you can't do it, the second best method is through all these DocuSign and all of that, or you can get a scanned copy of the contract. Between both these, I think it's a legally valid contract. You will have enough documentation to show that they have legally agreed to the contract. So that should be fine.
Sure. Thank you.
It'll hold up before evidentiary value of that contract will be enough for it for a court.
Sure. Thank you.
I think we have Sheetal. Sheetal, do you have a question?
Hi, am I audible? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so little off, so I'm stuck in one case and I just want to take some expert opinion of Shivani and you, ma'am. So last year we applied for one fashion show. So we are a fashion, handloom fashion brand, and the show didn't happen. Never it happened only. So now the organizers are asking us to, either continue for the next year session, but they're so the future is so uncertain, and the amount we paid them was 1,06,000. Now they are saying that either you schedule it for the next season, which we are not ready, and if they are giving the refund, they are only giving 60% of the amount.
Okay.
So and it wasn't mentioned on the contract anywhere that they will give us the half refund if the event is cancelled altogether. So what should be our stand now?
So you'll have to look at the fine print, Sheetal. It's important to look at the entire contract, A to Z, and ensure that there are no clauses which give them the right to retain certain amounts in cases of results of force majeure, termination clauses. All of these you will have to look at a little more closely before we can advise you on what next. Of course, you can make a claim asking them to give them the whole amount, but that should be done only after you study your contract properly, like through and through. Please look at the termination clauses.
So I asked one, I took some legal advice, and my lawyer is saying that we can file a case against them. So I'm not sure, matlab, going ahead with the case and, taking that long route and things like that.
So I think what you need to speak to your lawyer. See, one thing is, of course, it's easy to file a case, right? It's not a very difficult thing to do,
Yeah.
and in a lot of times it might not be a very expensive affair also. But there are two things that I always, when we mentor startups, we have a very active litigation team in fact, our primary practice is also corporate litigation. So one of the things I always tell startups, especially, is that your time and your resource in terms of money or in terms of your time is very, very limited. Okay, because mostly startups work with small teams.
Yes.
So it is necessary for you to understand that legal processes in India are not going to be, I file and somebody will it'll happen in the next 6 months. It may not. You should ask your lawyer if there's a specific forum he's seeking. Where does he plan to file? If it is a civil court, is it MSME court? Where is he going to file? Because you are not really, as a startup founder, they are not bothered where you actually file, but it is also very important for you to know when the result will happen, and if yes, how quickly and how long. Because if a civil court can take anything between 6 and 10 years. An MSME court is fairly, it has a more stringent process. What is the success rates? I'm not saying success rates of whether you'll win or lose your case, that no lawyer can give you an assurance. But how quickly do these cases finish, and can you sustain litigation? Let's say he says civil court. Can you sustain this litigation for 1 lakh, 1.06, 1 lakh and 6,000? You said, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you like to sustain this litigation for, let's say, 5 years for that amount? It's a cost benefit analysis, right? So a lot of times before you initiate litigation, it is important for you to do a cost benefit analysis and also add the third vector of time and then make a decision.
Okay, ma'am. I think so. Things are very clear. Let me see.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the COVID has thrown up all of these unexpected events that we are all having to deal with.
We are seeing a lot of legally, from a legal standpoint, as I was discussing earlier, COVID has completely changed our practice. So in some ways, not in a very pleasant way. Like, for example, we do a lot more retrenchments now. We do a lot of termination of contract, and then there's a lot of litigation that is coming up. Like what Sheetal was saying, at various levels, these terminations are happening, and courts are holding that COVID was an unexpected event and nobody knew. So yes, we have to give benefit of doubt to the other party. So and we are seeing a lot of things like, like you said, force majeure clauses, leases are getting terminated. All of these things are happening, and this is a very new phase even for lawyers, because the judges also understand the concept of COVID. They understand businesses are under stress, so they're taking a more neutral view, instead of saying, okay, you breached that contract, so please pay them. So they're taking a very neutral approach. So I think that is something that we need to put it consider before we think of legal notices and cases, etc.
Wow, that's good to hear that, the courts are also taking a more lenient view and, understanding the pain that, businesses are going through right now. So Maitri,
Yes.
I just want to get to a critical question, which we've got from a lot of the participants before this session as well. And Neha has also typed it in the chat window here. As a startup, we are always budget constrained, right? And when you hear law, you think, big budgets. So the question from the founders is, how, what kind of budgets are we talking about? Is there a way to do some of these things on shoestring budgets? And what are those numbers that one should keep in mind? Of course, there is a spectrum, right? But what's the bottom of the pyramid, so to say, that a startup founder says, this much I need to set aside for my legal activities?
It's a very interesting question. You're basically asking me to give out the rates that I charge. Okay, let me approach it this way. There's a significant difference between how startups in, let's say, other countries budget their legal expenses to how startups in India budget their legal expenses. So if you look at a startups, I mean, let's say a mid-sized startup which has its seed rounds balance sheet in US, you'll find their legal expenses to be in the top 5 lines. Whereas in India, in most cases, it doesn't even appear. So uh, I think slowly startups are beginning to understand the need for lawyers. Now, to answer your question very specifically, like I said, um, there are organizations, like there are lawyers across. See, I don't think it's a good idea to go with the lawyer who is the cheapest, because unless of course they are good and you've heard of a reference or something like that. Lawyers are just like doctors, you should go through a reference. And working with startups is a very specialized field. It is not that every lawyer, a lawyer who argues, who's a fantastic lawyer, they may be fantastic lawyers, but they may not have enough understanding of about startups. So it's important for you to find lawyers who have some working experience with startups. And across India now, since geography is not really a challenge, across India there are a lot of lawyers who are mentoring startups, who are, like, for example, a forum like this. Lawyers associate with these kind of forums, and they're happy to work with any references that they get. It might be for a limited number of hours at a very discounted rate. In fact, Varuna does that as well. We give a limited number of hours in a month, and we do work with some sort of a limit. We don't apply our general rates to startups till the point that they get to a certain stage. If they're full-fledged works, like if you feel like general advisory, I think you should be able to get at a very reasonable cost from a good lawyer. So specifics, I don't think I can really tell you, because they range. Each lawyer is different, each organization is different. But for example, if I were to ask you about for drafting agreements, let's say, there are people who do it at even 30,000, 25,000. Good stuff, good lawyers. But you need to find somebody who will give you that time. It's a discounted rate, so you need to find that lawyer. The next aspect is, if you want full-fledged work, like you want somebody to work for a transaction, you want somebody to go through your entire HR structure and give you advice on the best way, I'm afraid they'll charge you a little more. But I think you can, startups do negotiate, they negotiate very well. So it might be a bit expensive, but yes, it will. I think most startups come to us with those queries only when they need it. So it's not like, it's not something that it's not on their mind. It is on their mind for some specific reason. So you can always negotiate, but I think you just find the right lawyer, develop a relationship, find somebody who mentors startups, and you will find that they're reasonable.
Yeah, I think you brought up some very valid points. I think the doctor analogy helped to say that, you need to think about legal expenses differently, and you need to see what kind of value they can add to your venture, right? If you structure it right, like you said, the Zomato case, you structure it right, it can actually become a differentiator. So you need to look at legal, the legal aspect as well of your business, to say, I need to spend on it, I need to get it right, and can I use it as a differentiator? So, thank you for that. Do we have any other questions from the people in the session, or we'll take up one more from the list that was emailed to us? So also, so I'll just pick up another question from the email list. Maitri, there was a very specific question saying, industrial law for consumer electronics. Now, if you could, guide the group to maybe some places, or, if you could talk about that, and also maybe share some guidance on where specific verticals, if people are in, where should they be going to see what compliances they need to be up to speed with?
Yeah. So that was a very specific question. I saw that one, but see, I think in respect of industrial laws, everyone to give a specific answer to that question, there's an overhaul of labor laws that is happening right now. Labor codes are being overhauled. They've in fact been passed, and gazette notifications also have come through. But each state needs to has to notify it and adopt it. So at the central level it's happened, at the state levels it's yet to happen. So a lot of these issues might become a little more simpler from a labor law standpoint of view. I think when she said industrial laws, I assume she mentioned labor laws, Industrial Disputes Act, etc. Now, specifically with respect to how do you look at these things, um, the best way, I mean, I would say that labor laws are fairly complicated as they stand today. So there is a need for you to. It's also very specific. It's specific. It's not something that applies to the whole of the country. There's a national standard. There's state rules. So it's a bunch of multiple things. Like even compliances that I think for the specific industry of consumer electronics, they are governed by three different levels: national level, state level, and the local municipal levels. And things like, anything, if you have a factory, what do you do with the factory? What are the compliances? All of these are three tier compliances, so to say. So that question will require a lot of research from my side. However, what I can tell you is a lot of the states today have started this whole concept of single window clearances. So Telangana definitely has one. I think Haryana has one. Tamil Nadu has one. Karnataka has one. So all of these single window clearances make life very easy for these industrial units and startups, where they've digitized it. You can say what kind of, are you an office, are you an establishment, are you an industrial unit? So based on that, they're giving you a single window clearance. Once you clear that, you have basically ticked off almost a dozen laws. So if you can look whether you have a single window clearance wherever you are operating, I think that can be a good start point. And if there are any specific issues for that state, like for example, there are some of the states have these e-waste disposal rules, okay, which might not apply to the rest of the states. Things like that, those specific things we'll have to look at based on where you're located. But otherwise, I think generally the thumb rule, you can start your research at that single window clearance websites.
Wow, it's really good to hear that there are these single window clearances, at least in some states. I can tell you, my personal brush with labor laws was not pretty. We built Intellitorts clean, right? I mean, it was in our mind, we were, compliant with everything. And then when we went through the acquisition, there was a legal due diligence. And that's when we realized that there is register A, B, C, D, and E that needs to be maintained, and Haryana requires some ₹5 per month to be set aside. And there's some very archaic things, right? But the fact is that we were not aware, and then we had to scramble and get all of those compliances in place. So it's good to know that there are efforts on to simplify this for startups.
It's part of the ease of doing business in India efforts. So yes, and labor laws are all coming in from from the British times. So there, a lot of them have been amended and updated, but the structures are will seem very alien. I mean, they don't seem alien to me because for the last 15 years I've been reading them. But generally, for most people, they look extremely silly. So I think the single window clearance is a good place to start off for most startups. So then, your annual compliances also can be done through those labor compliances.
Great. I think we have time for one quick question. We have Neha asking in the chat window, a few must look into points for e-commerce. And I think this might be relevant to a lot of people.
Right. I think fundamentally e-commerce, again, you will have to look at your terms and, okay, from a very top level, being agnostic to what you are specifically dealing with in your e-commerce business. From a top level, ensure your terms and conditions are clear, your privacy policies are clear, especially if you're doing payment gateways and those kind of systems yourself and not through a payment gateway. Ensure that you have enough encryption and all that is required. You need to ensure that if you are storing information, for example, personally identifiable information about your customers, like my name, address, email ID, etc. You need to follow certain requirements and encryption standards under the Information Technology Act of 2000. These are fundamentally what you need to look at as an e-commerce business. Moving one step from there, you also will look at your product specific compliances. Obviously, if you're looking at pharmaceuticals or the cosmetic plus pharmaceutical products, they're called something I'm forgetting right now, the things like that. Or if you're looking at food and beverage, which are perishable, or you're looking at children's toys, for instance, there will be specific disclaimers, specific terms of use that you will require. So fundamentally, from an e-commerce business, I think this is what you will need to look at from a contract running your business point of view. In terms of tax, GST, and all that, I think your auditors slash the accountants will do the setup for most businesses.
Thank you so much, Maitri. I think we're out of time. We had so many questions. And, thank you for sharing your story. I think legal is one of those fields that, the more you get in, the more there is to know. So it's, the time is never going to be enough for questions. So thank you so much for joining and, for sharing your inspiring story. I think the fact that, you've committed to doing 20% pro bono is so beautiful. So good luck with your journey as well. And thank you so much for being here. We have a WhatsApp group. I hope you will be, joining it so that in future, any entrepreneurs who have questions, we have that network for people to be able to reach out to you in the future as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shivani. It's nice to meet women entrepreneurs, and it's really nice to have been part of this program today.